Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Philip Emeagwali. The world's fastest computing that's executed across up to 1 billion processors is the end product of the supercomputer technology that then US President Bill Clinton described as the Philip Emeagwali formula for making computers faster. In 1989, I was in the news for discovering that the slowest processors could be used to solve the most difficult problems in science, engineering, and medicine, and used to find their answers at the fastest speeds. The fastest computer is used to foresee the weather before going outside. During my childhood in Nigeria of early 1960s post-colonial Africa, I read of great minds of mathematics and physics. In early 1970s, I read about Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein. In January 1960, and at age 5, I enrolled in St. Patrick's Primary School, Sapele, in the western region of the British West African colony of Nigeria. In 1960, the order of me becoming the subject of school essays in the US, Canada, and UK was 1 in 1 billion. But after 30 years, I was studied with the icons of science such as Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein. Those school essays were recognitions I could not have imagined. In 1960, the word computer wasn't even in the vocabulary of a Nigerian, and the word supercomputer hasn't been coined. I began programming supercomputers on June 20, 1974 at 1800 Southwest Campus Way, Corvallis, Oregon, USA. At that time, there was no computer in Nigeria, and in 1974, the word internet wasn't even in the vocabulary of an American computer scientist. My father's nursing career impacted my early development. That was the reason I grew up in Nigerian cities such as Akure, Sapele, Burutu, Forcados, Uromi, Abo, Ibuzo, and Asaba. As a nurse in the western region of colonial and post-colonial Nigeria, my father was frequently transferred from one general hospital to the other. He worked in each hospital for about 2 years, and in that short period, I could not learn the local language of our new community, such as the Yoruba language of Akure, the Ishekiri language of Sapele, the Ijaw language of Burutu and Forcados, and the Isan language of Uromi. I lived in Abo for 3.5 years and then understood their Ika language. During the 30-month-long Nigerian Civil War that ended on January 15, 1970, the Biafran government could not pay salaries, and the refugees were unemployed and could not pay for the medical services they received. By the end of the war, the Biafran army had lost control of 80% of Biafra, and most Biafrans were refugees in Biafra. My father was a volunteer nurse in Biafran refugee camps. Papa was a volunteer nurse, at the hospital in Oka, Biafra, from late September 1967 to January 1968, and at the medical clinic in Oba, Biafra, from late January 1968 to March 21, 1968, and at the refugee camps in Oketiti, Biafra, from March 29, 1968 to early July 1969, and was the only medical practitioner in the fishing community of Ndoni, Biafra, from mid-July 1969 to January 19, 1970. Like every Nigerian, I spoke the grammatically simplified Nigerian Pidgin language, which is incomprehensible to an American. Pidgin is used in informal conversations among friends and in markets, and spoken as the second lingua franca across the 250 ethnic groups in Nigeria. I might say to a Nigerian lady, "Babe, you too fine, oh. This food sweet well. You don't do." I'm fluent in my ancestral Igbo language. Igbo is an endangered language that's only spoken in the southeastern region of Nigeria. I use Google to translate any email sent to me in Igbo language. Biko, jiri nwayọọ kwuo okwu a. Please speak slowly. Achọrọ m ka mụ na gị gbaa egwu. I want to dance with you. Before the age of 12, I grew up in non-Igbo speaking towns in Nigeria. However, we spoke Igbo at home. The southern boundary of Nigeria is a coastline that faces the Atlantic Ocean. When I was 3 and 4 years old, we lived in the Nigerian coastal towns of Burutu and Fokados, both in the Niger Delta in southern Nigeria. My family lived in Ijaw-speaking Fokados and did so for the 2 or 3 months before and after my 4th birth date, and presumably in the nurses' quarters of the Fokados General Hospital that employed my father as its relief duty staff nurse. In 1958, the year we lived in Fokados, it was a small coastal fishing community of fewer than 1,000 persons in the Niger Delta of southern Nigeria. The Fokados General Hospital was built in 1890. It predated the Onitsha General Hospital by a decade. Some describe the Fokados General Hospital as the first modern hospital in West Africa. 5 centuries earlier, Fokados was a major Portuguese slave trading port. Millions of Nigerian slaves were taken to the Portuguese colony of Brazil as domestic and plantation workers. For that reason, Brazil is the second most populous black country in the world, and second only to Nigeria. The Fokados slave dungeon was built in 1475. The Fokados slave wharf is one of the longest in Africa. For 4 centuries, millions of slaves landed on the Fokados wharf to begin their long journey to the Americas and across the Atlantic Ocean. The 4 centuries of non-stop slave trading in Fokados is to Nigeria what the atomic bombing of Hiroshima is to Japan, and the Auschwitz concentration camp is to the Jewish people. For those reasons, the Fokados slave wharf should be listed as a United Nations World Heritage Site. Fokados is where Nigeria began. Fokados was the 15th century's administrative capital of the geographical area we now call Nigeria. Fokados was the Abuja of the 15th century Nigeria. My older sister, Onyari Florence, was born in Forcados in 1958. The 9 children of my mother had university education and became Nigerian Americans. The first school in Igbo land was founded on November 15, 1858. That school was a short stroll from the birthplace of my father and great-grandfathers, and was also located a short stroll from the present location of General Hospital, Onitsha. That was the first hospital in Igbo land. In 1857, that General Hospital wasn't built. My great-grandfather, whose first name was Emeagwali, was born and raised where the General Hospital is now located. 40 years later, and at the end of the 19th century, the British colonial administrators decided to build the present General Hospital of Onitsha, citing eminent domain law that gives the government the power to take over any land and convert it to public use. The Emeagwali family was ordered to move and relocate a walking distance away to 17 Bar Road, Onitsha. Our proximity to that first school in Igbo land gave us several generations of Ndi Onitsha, an unfair educational advantage over heartland Igbo-speaking people. Being among the first Nigerians to learn how to read and write meant that Ndi Onitsha emigrated earliest, and did so from Igbo land to the farthest regions of Nigeria. That was the reason Nnamdi Azikiwe, the first president of Nigeria, whose parents were born in Onitsha, was born in 1904 in Zungeru, the capital of the British Protectorate of northern Nigeria. It was the reason my grand-uncles emigrated from Onitsha to faraway Kano to work as clerks, and why my father emigrated from Onitsha to Kano in 1948 and to Akure in 1950. Papa was trained and employed in General Hospital, Akure, as a 29-year-old junior staff nurse. By age 9, I had lived at a dozen Nigerian addresses in 7 towns. The first was at 11 Ekemeso Street, Akure, Western Region, colonial Nigeria. My father was employed as a nurse in the General Hospital of Akure, and from 1950 to early 1956. From the General Hospital, Akure, Papa was transferred to Central Hospital, Sapele, Western Region. At first, we lived in the house quarters of Sapele in 1956. That was where my immediate younger brother, Ndu Agoba Francis, was born in May 1956. In early 1958, my father was transferred from the General Hospital Sapele on what was called a 6-month relief duty to the coastal towns of Burutu and Forcados. My family of 5 spent most of the year 1958 in the latter 2 towns. In April 1958, we left Burutu to come back to Onitsha to attend the funeral of my maternal grandfather, Chieka Balonwu. Chieka was a farmer who lived his entire life at 6C Wilkinson Road, Onitsha. Chieka died after a long period of protracted illness that was related to diabetes. A group portrait in our family photo album, taken in April 1958, had my then 19-year-old mother, who was expecting her 3rd child. Sitting beside her were 3 female friends from Onitsha. All 4 women were elegantly dressed, but sat on a beautiful mat that was placed on the wooden stairways of our house in Burutu. The 4 women were Inyamma Agatha Emeagwali, Mabel Ifejika, Clara Chude, and Modupe. We lived in Burutu for 6 months, from early to mid-1958. As a 3-year-old, I remember living in Burutu in that one-story wooden house that was built upon support stilts. Our house was elevated to protect us from daily tidal floods and occasional storms. We lived in Forcados for 6 months, from mid to late 1958. We lived in the nurses' quarters of the General Hospital Forcados that was a short stroll from the community's post office. My sister, Onyare Florence, was born in 1958 in the General Hospital Forcados, and my sister, Chinwe Edith, was born in 1960 in the Central Hospital, Sapele. After my father returned from his 6-month relief duty in Forcados, we lived in the compound that was next to the Eagle Club, Yoruba Road, Sapele. We lived besides the Eagle Club from early 1959 to late April 1962. The Eagle Club was established by Arthur Edward Prest, who later became the Nigerian ambassador to the United Kingdom. The Eagle Club was sold in the early 1940s to a Lebanese. The manager of the Eagle Club was Dixon McGray. The resident musician was Sally Young. The Eagle Club was the dancing place in Sapele. When we hear the visiting musicians rehearsing, I and other children will sneak inside the Eagle Club and enjoy a free live rehearsal concert. I enjoyed Victor Laya rehearsing his hit song Aigana, and enjoyed Hobart Udemba and his African Baby vocal party rehearsing their hit song Bottom Belle that went like this: Bonswe Azikiwe, Bonswe Ayo Ayo, Bonswe Azikiwe, Bonswe Ayo Ayo. As a 4-year-old, I played along the dusty Yoruba Road and in front of the Eagle Club. And I remember Festus Okotiobo, a man of means and the most flamboyant politician in Nigeria, in his chauffeur-driven limo car, long limo, to draw the attention of us children carelessly playing on Yoruba Road. Okotiobo's chauffeur blasted his car's loud signature horn. By the mid-1960s, the Eagle Club was demolished, and Okotiobo bought a portion of the land it was built upon. Okotiobo built his Orogun Villa on that land, which is now 149 Yoruba Road, Sapele. In 1959, some of the band members at the Eagle Club will give me a penny to buy 2 sticks of cigarettes for them and bring back their change of half a penny. That was the purchasing power of a penny between early 1959 and April 1962. From late April 1962 to November 1963, we lived next to Premier Club and Hotel Uromi, that was the town's prostitutes' compound. The most memorable event that occurred when we lived near Premier Club at Abo was that the renowned boxer Dick Tiger defeated Jean Fulmer on August 10, 1963 in Liberty Stadium, Ibadan, Nigeria. Tiger defeated Fulmer to retain his world middleweight boxing title. The Premier Club was downstairs of a 2-story building that was owned by an Igbo man named Uba. The Premier Club was the dancing place in the Uromi of the early 1960s. From our adjacent compound, we hear the visiting musicians rehearsing. I and other children will immediately sneak inside the Premier Club and enjoy the free live rehearsal concert. I enjoyed Zil Onya rehearsing his hit songs, Vicky Nyama Afum and Opigwe. In a concert at the Premier Club of 1963, Emmanuel Ntia and his Eastern Stars Dance Band of Nigeria rocked its dance hall with their X-rated #1 high life hit song called Call Chop. Like other Igbo children in Uromi of 1962, we learned the sensational Eastern acrobatic cultural dance of the spirits. From mid-December 1963 to late 1966, we lived along Benoba Road, Abo, Midwest Region, Nigeria, and in a 3-bedroom house about a block downhill and on the left from the house of Jerete Marere, the first governor of the Midwest Region of Nigeria. My elementary school education consisted of 2 years at St. Patrick's Primary School, Sapele, 2 years at St. Anthony's Primary School, Uromi, and 2 years at St. John's Primary School, Abo. The names of the first 2 schools have changed. The St. Patrick's Primary School, Sapele, that I attended shared premises with the town's then only Catholic church. The St. Anthony's Primary School, Uromi, that I attended was across the street from the town's then only Catholic church. I enrolled in classes 3 and 4 at St. Anthony's from late April 1962 to mid-December 1963. After earning my first school leaving certificate in December 1965, following 2 years at St. John's Primary School, Abo, Midwest Region, Nigeria, I enrolled for 15 months at St. George's College, Obinomba, Midwest Region, Nigeria. Like 99% of the children in Biafra, I dropped out of school for 3 years during ages 12 to 15. I dropped out to live in refugee camps of Biafra of the Nigerian Civil War, but I also dropped out again for 2 years from Christ the King College, Onitsha, in March 1972, and after the Civil War was over. 1 in 15 Biafrans died during that 30-month-long war. In the list of the genocidal crimes of the 20th century committed against humanity, the death of 1 in 15 Biafrans was ranked 5th. I'm the subject of school essays on computer inventors because I was in the news and because I contributed to the development of the world's fastest computers. Specifically, I discovered how to compress the time to solution of the most compute-intensive scientific problems, described as the 20 hardest problems that can be solved on extremely fast supercomputers. Likewise, I'm the subject of school essays on physicists and their discoveries because I was in the news for discovering how to compress the time to solution of the most compute-intensive problems arising from encoding the laws of physics and encoding those laws into the partial differential equation of calculus. Likewise, I'm in school essays on mathematicians and their contributions to mathematics because I was in the news for mathematically discovering how to reduce an initial boundary value problem of calculus defined in its interior domain by a system of coupled, nonlinear, time-dependent, and 3-dimensional partial differential equations. I discretized those equations to reduce them to a large-scale system of equations of computational linear algebra that approximated the governing initial boundary value problem. I'm in school essays on mathematicians who contributed to mathematics because I was in the news for mathematically discovering how to solve those algebraic equations and solve them to foresee otherwise unforeseeable global warming, and solve them to recover otherwise unrecoverable crude oil and natural gas buried up to 7.7 miles or 12.4 kilometers deep. I'm in school essays on physicists who contributed to physics because I was in the news for experimentally discovering how to make the most compute-intensive problems in physics and that are impossible to solve, possible to solve. I'm in school essays on scientists and their discoveries because I was in the news for discovering how to solve the most challenging problems in science called grand challenges, and how to solve them across the slowest processors in the world and solve them at the fastest possible speeds in the world. Once upon a time, before the 4th of July 1989 to be exact, the fastest 1,000 computers in the world computed with only one custom manufactured and super fast vector processor. Before the 4th of July 1989, parallel supercomputing, or attaining the fastest speeds across the slowest processors, was mocked and ridiculed as science fiction and was dismissed as a beautiful theory that required experimental confirmation. On the 4th of July 1989, and in Los Alamos, New Mexico, USA, I confirmed parallel supercomputing to be faster than the fastest sequential computing. That contribution to computer science is the reason I won an award in 1989 that is referred to as the Nobel Prize of Supercomputing. My milestone in the history of the computer was marked as the first time the fastest speed in supercomputing was recorded across the slowest processors in the world. A year later, on June 20, 1990, the Wall Street Journal and other media wrote that Philip Emeagwali has experimentally discovered that parallel processing many problems at once, instead of sequentially processing one problem at a time, should be the starting point of the next generation of supercomputers. 1989 was the year that I discovered how to parallel process across a spherical island of identical and coupled processors that shared nothing. My new technology was a new internet in reality and not a computer by its very nature. 1990 was the year the supercomputing industry upgraded parallel processing from a theory to a discovery, and from science fiction novels to non-fiction computer science textbooks. I was in the news because I discovered a quantum shift or a significant change in the way we look at both the computer and the supercomputer. After the 4th of July 1989, the fastest 1,000 computers in the world were computing in parallel and communicating across up to 10,649,600 processors. We now have a more profound and surer understanding of why and how the world's fastest computer parallel processes. Massively parallel processing was the stone that was rejected as rough and unsightly, but that became the headstone of the supercomputer industry. According to the guiding lights of the world of computing of the 1970s and 80s, namely Gene Amdahl of the IBM world of mainframe computing of the 1960s, Seymour Cray of the world of vector computing of the 1980s, and Steve Jobs of the world of personal computing of the 1990s. And according to these three giants, it would forever remain impossible to use 8 or more processors to achieve a speed up of 8-fold. In the spirit of the 1970s and 80s, the June 14, 1976 issue of the Computer World magazine carried an article titled, quote, "Research in Parallel Processing Questioned as Waste of Time," unquote. 14 years after that article, the June 1990 issue of the SIAM News, the flagship bi-monthly news journal of mathematicians, carried a cover story that described how Philip Emeagwali mathematically and experimentally discovered how to save time by parallel supercomputing through 64 binary 1000 processors. And the June 20, 1990 issue of the Wall Street Journal and several newspapers and magazines carried a story that reported that Philip Emeagwali discovered that parallel supercomputing is not an enormous waste of everybody's time. I contributed to the newer understanding of the supercomputer, and my discovery changed the way we think of the supercomputer. In the bygone way of thinking, the supercomputer solved one problem at a time. In the contemporary way of thinking, the supercomputer solves many problems at once. My scientific discovery of the world's fastest computing across the world's slowest processors became computing's defining moment and the bedrock of the supercomputer. That scientific discovery of parallel supercomputing made the news headlines because I invented the fastest computer and invented the supercomputer technology across the slowest 65,536 processors in the world. On a relative scale, the speed increase I discovered in 1989 was 3,000 times greater than the speed advantage the commercial aircraft has over the bicycle. The fastest supercomputer of today is 100 million times faster than the fastest supercomputer of 30 years ago. In 1989, it made the news headlines that I discovered how a large-scale computational physicist can compress her time to solution from 180 computing years to 1 supercomputing day. My scientific discovery opened the door to the state-of-the-art supercomputers used to compress time to solution from 30,000 years on a computer to 1 day on a supercomputer. Between April 18 to 20, 1967, an IBM supercomputer scientist named Gene Amdahl wrote it would forever be impossible to compress time to solution from 8 days to 1 day, and do so by parallel supercomputing, the most compute-intensive problems in the world. That pessimistic assertion that originated between April 18 to 20, 1967, and from the Spring Joint Computer Conference in Atlantic City, New Jersey, entered every supercomputer textbook to become the famed Amdahl's law. That Amdahl's law is to supercomputing across plural processors what Moore's law is to computing within a singular processor. On the date Amdahl's law was invented, I was fleeing as a 12-year-old refugee, fleeing from Abo, Nigeria, and fleeing to Onitsha, Biafra. Onitsha was my ancestral hometown. In the following 30 months, Onitsha became the bloodiest battlefield in African warfare. During that Nigerian civil war, 1 in 15 Biafrans died. 22 years after Amdahl's law was published, I discovered that the unimaginable to compute is possible to supercompute. I discovered how to exceed the 8 processor factor of 8 speed up limit known as Amdahl's law, and how to use 64 binary thousand processors to solve the most compute-intensive problems in the world. My scientific discovery of the fastest computing made the news headlines as the biggest fundamental change in computer science. My scientific discovery opened the door to a revolution, namely computers and supercomputers that could solve many problems at once. The scientific discovery that I recorded during my email experiments of July 4, 1989, provided the designers of the supercomputer with the insight that massively parallel processing is useful. My new insight changed the way the first supercomputer that computes across the slowest processors. The supercomputer of the 1980s and earlier was the size of your refrigerator. The supercomputer of today occupies the space of a soccer field, consumes as much electricity as a small American town, and costs as much as the budget of a small African nation. That change in the way the supercomputer looks and costs is my contribution to computer science. In 1989, I was in the news for discovering that the slowest processors could be used to solve the biggest problems and find their answers at the fastest speeds. The fastest computer is why you know the weather before going outside. From an early age in Nigeria, I studied the contributions of the great minds of science. I learned that Euclid is the father of geometry. Later, I learned that Albert Einstein is the father of modern physics. Becoming a father of a then unknown technology wasn't something I could have imagined during the ages 12 to 15. In that period, I dropped out of school to live in refugee camps of Biafra, created by the Nigerian Civil War. For 3 years following May 1967, all schools in Biafra were closed, and 1 in 15 Biafrans died during that 30-month-long war that ended on January 15, 1970. In the list of the worst genocidal crimes of the 20th century committed against humanity, the death of 1 in 15 Biafrans was ranked 5th. The quintessential questions of supercomputing were these: how do we compute faster? How do we do so by a billionfold? And what makes the supercomputer super? My contribution to supercomputing is this: I discovered how to compress the time to solution of the most compute-intensive problems. Once upon a time, before the 4th of July 1989, to be exact, the fastest 1,000 supercomputers in the world computed with only one custom manufactured superfast vector processor. Before the 4th of July 1989, parallel supercomputing was mocked and ridiculed as a beautiful theory that lacked experimental confirmation. On the 4th of July 1989, in Los Alamos, New Mexico, USA, I discovered practical parallel supercomputing and discovered the technology by harnessing the slowest processors in the world and using them to solve the most compute-intensive problems in the world and solve those problems at the fastest speeds in the world. That invention was newsworthy because I discovered a paradigm shift of tectonic proportions that was a huge change in the way we look at the computer and the supercomputer. Parallel supercomputing was the stone rejected as rough and unsightly, but that became the milestone and the headstone of the supercomputer industry. I was in the news because I contributed to the understanding of the world's fastest computers. My discovery changed the way we think of the supercomputer. In the customary way of computing, the supercomputer solved one problem at a time. In my new way of computing, the supercomputer solves up to 1 billion problems at once. My scientific discovery of parallel supercomputing became computing's defining moment and the bedrock of the supercomputer. My scientific discovery opened the door to a revolution, namely computers and supercomputers that could solve many problems at once. This discovery is my contribution to the supercomputer as it's known today that could become the computer of tomorrow. Massively parallel computing is the vital technology that enabled the supercomputer to tower over the computer that's not parallel processing. Thank you. I'm Philip Emeagwali. Thank you. Thank you.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.